Do you wonder what's going on in Romania? Do you wonder what democracy means? Do you wonder what globalism is? Is it a nefarious and peculiar thing, a difficult thing to understand because it's too diffuse? Let me unpack it for you. During COVID, we learned that globalism was when bureaucratic agencies, either national and global, appear to act in coordination with corporate and commercial entities to create a central sovereignty that denies the voices of individuals wherever you're from. That's what globalism means. And what it does the whole time is it tells you that it's helping you. Look at what's going on over in Romania, in Europe right now. This dude, Carlin Georgescu, he was this writing by Arnaud Bertrand, who's we learned about because of Glenn Greenwald. This guy helps you understand it. And why I reckon this is a good perspective to start with is he is avowedly of the left. Check this out. There's no overstating how insane this is. He means the ban and arrest of Carlin Georgescu. In a normally functioning media environment, it will be a scandal of enormous proportions. Question, why isn't it a scandal of enormous proportions? After cancelling, based on a now debunked lie, the presidential elections that Georgescu was winning, they cancelled elections. Romania has now barred him from even running at all. Let me know in the comments and chat what you think about that. Is that what tyranny looks like now? Is that what globalism is? A country has a national election in Romania where I've never been. I've got no skin in the game. I don't care what goes on in there. Do you? Do you care what goes on in Romania other than it ought to be built on democratic principles if that's what it claims it's about? That surely should be happening. Agree or disagree with his political ideas? I'm afraid Georgescu is right here. This is the writing of the brilliant Arnaud Bertrand. This shows that Romania, and by extension the EU, that's obviously more significant because Romania is sort of a sovereign nation. It's just a little place in Europe. But the EU, bureaucratic body, comparable to what? NATO, comparable to what? WHO, WF, World Bank, IMF. When people talked about globalism back in the Naomi Klein days, when talking about globalism was a leftist idea, like, hey, what are all these bureaucracies that seem to be there just to facilitate advanced global capitalism? That ain't the argument no more. Now it's the right that are making those arguments. That's why you got your Jimmy Dores and your Glenn Greenwalds lining up and agreeing with, peculiarly, occasionally, with figures on the right, like those that have just been listed by Charlie Kirk there when we were talking about Gavin Newsom. Remember to check that out if you're watching this somewhere else. So, here's a small reminder of what happened by Arnaud Bertrand. First, Georgescu unexpectedly won the first round of Romania's presidential election in November through what appeared to be a highly effective social media campaign. Social media has changed the political landscape. Of course, it's changed it in terms of advertising and marketing. We all behave in different ways now online. It's unthinkable, isn't it, that 20 years ago we'd have done the majority of our consuming remotely? How extraordinary that is. Well, what's changed politically is now you don't get your news from the BBC or MSNBC or any of the other centralised media organisations that are either dependent on taxes or commercial funding. You get it from a whole host of bespoke media operators. And while someone like David Icke would say, you're not conspiracy theory enough, or you're too willing to sort of kowtow to Elon Musk or Trump or whoever, the fact is you've got access to a wide range of political and cultural opinions. And because of X, David Icke is allowed to go on X and criticize someone like Elon Musk. The media landscape has changed forever. It was only a matter of time before that changed politics. Trump was one of the first beneficiaries of that change, along with the Brexit movement in the UK and the countless other, now no longer anomalous, right-wing political leaders cropping up all over Europe and the world. Now, it seems that the EU are trying to stop the rot with Romania because, Romania, I'm sure the EU can surrender that. I don't know how powerful and significant Romania is economically, but we do know that Germany and France and Italy, these are significant countries, even though Italy is now run by a somewhat right-wing figure. France did everything within its power, as did Germany, to prevent right-wing or nationalist movements coming to prominence. Now, I'm actually, in spite of what you might read, not right-wing and not a rapist. Two extraordinary facts about me. But what I am is a supporter of actual democracy and the will of the people and decentralization in the broadest possible terms, i.e. the sovereignty of the individual and the sovereignty of the community based on ballot, based on conversation, based on communication. That way, if communities were run like parishes or boroughs or dioceses with maximum democracy, you could have one community that was super trans and fluid, and you could have another one that was super Christian and conservative, and it wouldn't matter because ultimately we're all on this bandwidth for a limited amount of time before the inevitability of death and perhaps the great hope of eternity for those of you that believe in such things like I do. But while we're here, we've got to have some agreed upon universal principles. like sacrifice, duty, kindness, love, all of which is being co-opted by this globalist movement that peculiarly, in the holy name of its endeavour, is shutting down democracy. It's a bit like the Christian Crusades, where in the name of Christianity, Christians marauded across the world killing people. Like, hold on a minute, have we got sidetracked? Maybe we got sidetracked. Or the crises in the Catholic Church, where if you find entrenched institutional pedophilia, you maybe have lost your way a little bit. The same thing's happening with globalism based on humanitarianism. Your Klaus Schwab style, we have to penetrate every government in the world. And when we've lubed them up and penetrated them, finally we'll have democracy. And potentially hemorrhoids if you penetrate too deeply. Let's look a little more at what's going on over there in Romania. So, social media is changing the political environment. That's obvious. That's why they want to introduce censorship and prohibit free speech, because they can see it's impossible to maintain centralized power if you have diversity of thought. The first beneficiaries, as we saw in the Gavin Newsom-Charlie Kirk conversation, have been the right, because centralized media tends towards and trends toward what I would call the centralized left, i.e. you're not radically of the left if you ultimately support corporations and commercialism, or if you support the state. Remember, I'm English, so when I talk about the left, I don't mean Sieg Heil or Soviet Unionism. I don't mean National Socialism, like the Nazis, and I don't mean Soviet Socialism, like the Russian Soviet Union folks. I mean socialism derived from Christian principles, i.e. when Jesus Christ says, give up all your gear and follow me, pick up your cross and follow me. Easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter heaven. It's kind of an indication that if you worship money, you're going to get yourself in some serious trouble. So when you look at your political leaders, ask, what does their God appear to be? Whether that's a dull, tedious bureaucrat like Thierry Breton, the EU operator that's down for cancelling elections, or maybe a demagogic figure who you admire and adore because of their panache and charisma and rhetorical style. If what they worship isn't God, i.e. the highest principle, love, devotion, togetherness, then what you got yourself there is some form of bullshit. Let's get deeper. Senolytics are the biggest discovery for promoting healthy aging. The aging process obviously isn't our friend, unless I suppose, there's eternal life. But while we're here, we want to be energetic and productive. That's why I use Qualia Senolytic with science-backed ingredients that have helped me feel, I would say, 15 years younger in a matter of just months. Everyone accumulates senescent cells, known as zombie cells. These senescent cells are old and worn out and not fulfilling a useful function for our health, but they take up space and nutrients from our healthy cells. Qualia Senolytic removes zombie cells and allow healthy cells to thrive. Resist aging at the cellular level. Try Qualia Senolytic. Go to QUALIA life.com/brand for up to, get this, 50% off, and use the code BRAND at the checkout for an additional 15% off. Try it now. Qualia Senolytic is also available at select GNC locations near you. Take it. Just 2 days a month. There's a link in the description. Who don't want to feel 15 years younger and get rid of them zombie cells? Then Romania's constitutional court annulled the victory of Georgescu and cancelled the elections altogether, primarily citing alleged Russian influence. Oh, Russian influence. Hey, this election, we would have honoured it, but there was Russian influence. You heard that before? Let me know in the comments and chat where you've seen Russian influence cited as the reason to delegitimise democracy before. Have you seen it in your country, for example? I don't know. Let me know. Primarily citing alleged Russian influence along with claims of undeclared campaign financing and fraudulent use of digital technologies. Yet it's now crystal clear, transparent, that this cancellation was based on a complete fabrication. What? Let me know in the comments and chat if you've heard of other Russiagate declarations that have proven to be utterly unfounded and later debunked. As I previously detailed, the declassified Romanian intelligence documents that served as justification for cancelling the election contain no actual evidence of foreign interference or manipulation. They merely documented a social media campaign involving 25,000 TikTok accounts coordinated through Telegram channels, completely standard practice in political campaigning. In effect, an entire presidential election was cancelled on the grounds of existence of a coordinated social media campaign on TikTok that the intelligence services claimed without concrete evidence resembled Russian tactics. You know who uses TikTok? Kids? Yes. Prostitutes? Yes. Everyone? Yes. but also Russians. So we're cancelling the election. Like, do you see how it works? You decide on an aim, and then how do you get to that aim? The objective is cancel this election. Oh, no, but aren't we pretending that we're a democracy? Yeah. All right, how do we still claim we're a democracy and also cancel the election? Russian interference? What? How can we claim Russian interference? Well, don't the Russians sometimes go on TikTok? They do. And did these people go on TikTok? What we got ourselves here is the legitimization for a cancelled election. You can use it for anything. If you want to cancel an election or a person, firstly make that choice, then work backwards from there. We want to cancel that person. How should we do it? I don't know yet, but we'll find something, because no motherfucker's perfect, I'll tell you that much. Even more insane, subsequent investigative reporting by Romanian journalists revealed that the TikTok campaign cited as evidence of Russian interference was actually funded by the ruling National Liberal Party itself. What? The same party that supported cancelling the election paid over 1 million RON, that's their currency I guess, to a marketing firm called Kensington Communication. Now they make themselves sound legit. Hello, we're Kensington Communication. Like, that's literally the name of the love interest in an Austin Powers movie. Have you ever seen that brilliant video, oh man, where they say that Austin Powers was the end of irony? It's a really, really good video. Oh, you'd love it, Isaac. I could do a whole video on that. Okay, so Kensington Communication to run the very campaign later characterized as foreign interference. So this whole thing appears to have been a deliberate ploy to provide intelligence services with grounds for nullifying an election that the ruling party was losing. Sound familiar? Yes, that's what globalism is now. We have an agenda. We have a raft and roster of global politicians that we can get into place in Canada, in the UK, in the USA, in Romania, wherever, so that when there are global meetings, we got our man or woman in place, ready to go, so that the decrees delivered in these G7 meetings or NATO summits or WF Davos passes are in alignment with what we want. And we can still call it democracy. And if anyone denies it, it's Russian interference, or you're a rapist, or you're a racist. We'll find some R word to shut your shit down with, let me tell you that. Even now, as Georgescu leads in the polls ahead of the rerun, they've taken the extraordinary step of barring him from participating in the elections entirely. What? In the name of democracy, we are banning this popular candidate. In the name of democracy, we are having all of these rival parties conglomerate and form an alliance against parties that gain significant votes. I'm referring to the German election, or the Dutch election, or the Italian elections, or the French elections. That's how they run this shit, no? What's even more disturbing is how this fabricated narrative of Russian interference continues to be propagated at the highest levels of European leadership. Just 4 days ago, on March the 5th, in a televised address to the French people, Macron stated as fact, President Putin's Russia violates our borders to assassinate opponents, manipulates elections in Romania and Moldova. It organises digital attacks against our hospitals to block their operations. This casual repetition of a thoroughly debunked claim. Let me know in the comments and chat how often you've seen thoroughly debunked claims reiterated in order to muddy the water. The irony is when Obama says at Stanford, we have to stop misinformation and disinformation, because even if you yourself are intelligent enough to discern the truth for yourself, a lot of people aren't, and it muddies the water. The delicious irony is that is their very tactic. By them, I mean the sets of interests that previously we understood to have captured mainstream media and the bureaucratic agencies that are influential around the world in matters of health and finance and war and pandemics, generally speaking. Let me know in the comments and chat if you agree with that. Shows how deeply embedded this fiction has become to the European political establishment's narrative, a convenient bogeyman to justify overriding democratic processes when they produce undesirable results. For all his faults, J.D. Vance was spot on this topic in his Munich speech. He specifically pointed to Romania as a prime example of Europe's retreat from its values. Here is J.D. Vance at that Munich thing. I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. Yeah, I saw that. Breton, that dude. For years, we've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. Have you noticed that? Yes, I've noticed it. But when we see European courts cancelling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. Good point by J.D. Vance. He's another one of them people that I've met a couple of times. And like when I see him mugged off, coated off, criticised by them liberalists and those peculiar centrists and those peculiar globalists that have captured the media space, I think, He's all right when I met him. He seems like a nice bloke. Again, I'm under no illusions that Vance himself is hypocritical here. He conveniently failed to mention that the US State Department in his own country was actually first to raise concerns about Russian involvement in Romanian's elections on December 4th, essentially providing cover for what followed. Furthermore, his support for Georgescu likely stems not from principled defence of democracy, but from ideological alignment with that side of the Romanian political spectrum. And in this sense, he's probably no better than the EU officials he criticises. Yet on the face of it, his commentary on this specific situation was correct. Have you ever heard of that person? He's called John Rawls. A mate of mine wrote a book about him once. John Rawls can be understood, at least in the most basic sense, he's obviously a lot more complicated than this, by this simple idea. If you have two kids and you've got to get them to share pizza, you would say to one kid, you cut the pizza, you choose which slice to take. Meaning, if you didn't know which bit of society you were going to get or which role within a society you were going to be playing, what type of society would you want? You would want a fair society, wouldn't you? And when you're raising your kids, you're raising them with a sort of sense of fairness and justice. I, extrapolating on these ideas of roles, say this: you shouldn't need to know the flag or name of a nation or tribe when talking about a conflict. You should just have the conflict described neutrally. There's an external aggressor that is very, very powerful, encroaching on the territory of a weaker nation. Oh yeah, yes, but prior there was some provocation. Oh yeah, yes. And after the provocation, though, it seems that the response was unduly martial and bellicose. Okay, well, before I tell you what I think, can you tell me, do you mean Russia and Ukraine or Israel and Gaza? Not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you. You have to decide if there's a principle there. You have to decide if there's a principle there. Oh, so there are principles. There is a God. There is a deeper reality. Let me know in the comments and chat where you fall on that matter without knowing whether I'm talking about Russia or Israel. Because guess what? I've not even decided in my own head which one I'm talking about. So let me know in the comments and chat if you could go, yes, but the reason that's different is because I agree with this one and I didn't agree with that one. Transmute. Having to discover a principle. All in all, the Romanian situation exposes a terrifying truth at work in European politics today. Democracy is celebrated only when it produces the correct results. When voters choose candidates deemed unacceptable by the political establishment, suddenly the democratic process itself becomes suspect, allegedly compromised by foreign interference or other conveniently vague threats. As such, what we're witnessing in Romania isn't merely a local political dispute. Cool. It's the canary in the coal mine for European democracy. Yes, as a whole. If an EU member state can cancel a legitimate election and then bar the winning candidate from running again without meaningful consequences, what's to prevent this playbook from being deployed elsewhere? The mask has slipped and what's underneath it is very ugly. Brilliant writing there from Arnaud Bertrand. We were put onto him by Glenn Greenwald, who's another Rumble premium contributor. And let me know too what you think in the comments and chat about the Romanian elections, the cancellation of the results and the arrest of political candidates in Romanian nations, and the extraordinary repackaging of the Russiagate and Russian interference narrative. Let me know if the Russian interference narrative is a way that you might detect that a globalist agenda is being pursued. And I'm sure Russian interference is a real thing. Let's have a look at various responses from Russian news. We've got a variety of our people that we know and admire from across the political spectrum here. Right, so firstly, Mike Benz. Europe has cancelled more elections than Russia. EU President Ursula von der Leyen found the time today to tweet about giving more money to the military-industrial complex and bringing in more migrants, but not a peep on EU member Romania cancelling elections to stop an EU skeptic from winning. Very, very telling. I mean, I suppose it makes sense because if you are the EU, you don't want the EU to be bereft of members. You don't want nations departing. So here's Clint Russell. What does he say? Quick primer in Romania. Right-winger wins election. Election gets cancelled by EU. New election process begins. EU bans him from running. NATO base is being built to wage war on Russia. Romanians don't want it. EU, NATO demons don't care. Then they lecture about democracy. I mean, if they're trying to build a base over there, if that's true, And it is, isn't it? It will be. Michael, then it just shows you that there is a globalist agenda, and we're seeing how that plays out. And the thing that I find most offensive is their continual claim that they're helping us. Michael Tracy said, every grandiose EU lecture on democracy must now have a mandatory sitcom laugh track. Yes, because the EU, while telling you they care about democracy, literally participate in the cancellation of elections. Ryan Grimm, first they annulled the election that he won based on false claims of Russian interference. Now they're banning him from running again. At least in China, the government produces decent housing, etc. for its citizens. If the West fully abandons democracy, what's the point? Let me know in the comments and chat what you think about that. Jimmy Dore, this is the end of democracy in Romania, and it's being supported by the EU, which is turning into a totalitarian state. Wholesale censorship and jailing people for speech. Now they're overthrowing democratically elected governments and criminalising opposition politicians. This is the tyranny that J.D. Vance was speaking against in Munich. Why do I have a feeling that the same people who are behind the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline are the same people behind this, and presumably the same interests that were behind the COVID pandemic, and presumably the same people that are behind the ongoing support of Ukraine's conflict with Russia, which ultimately has to be ended, even if Ukraine lose Crimea and are unable to join NATO. The world is changing. The world is changing really, really fast, and the globalists are clinging on with gangrenous fingers that ought to be amputated. But that's just what I think. Why don't you let me know what you think in the comments and the chat? We want to hear from you, and we want you to join us on Rumble Premium.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more uncensored content where free speech can flourish, join our live stream. Click the link right here to watch the next video if you want to, or become a member of a growing movement. Download the Rumble app and you'll be informed every time we make a new piece of content. Stay free.